All right. Welcome everyone to tonight's event, The Art of Science with Jill Pelto. My name is Vanessa Olson and I'm an adult services librarian here at the library. I'm thrilled to welcome you all both in person and at home. So Jill's going to give us a presentation about her work and then we'll have time for questions and answers at the end. For those of you who are joining us here in the library, I just wanted to let you know that this gray device here on the corner of my table is both the speaker, the microphone, and the camera. So those of you in the back of the room may need to speak up a little bit if you have a question. And I hope that you will grab a calendar on your way out with the library's other upcoming events. We've got a lot going on this. And I also hope that you will check out the ISU's First Amendment Days events, of which this is a part. For about 20 years now, the Ames Public Library has been partnering with the Greenlee School of Journalism for the First Amendment Days events. This year's theme is science communication, which is a particularly important topic for the First Amendment right now. And so I was thrilled to discover Jill's work and to be able to bring her to our community. So without further ado, Jill Pelto, you want to take it away?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for attending. It's really neat one of my favorite things is just getting to talk to different communities and kind of after I share what I do with my art and why I do it, if anyone wants to share any, environmental stories or things in your community that you're interested in. That's one of my favorite things that I get to do. And even though in-person events are awesome, I love that Zoom like opens that up and allows for more of that. Um, and so, yeah, I'll be sharing a presentation about my work to start, and then I'll leave plenty of time for like questions and anything you guys want to share on Zoom or in person. And so, yeah, I'll get started. Just one moment. Okay. So what I do is communicate different science topics through my art. And so a lot of those are environmental science topics in particular. So it could be stuff about changing habitats, different ecosystems. It could be stuff to do with the climate, wildlife, people, kind of like all sorts of topics and different landscapes around the world. And so the painting here in the background, I'll show you the whole piece and go into more detail on it a little bit later, but it's mainly watercolor. There's some details in a little few details in acrylic paint and colored pencil and some things like that. But most of my work that you'll see tonight is watercolor. That's the medium I use the most right now. And what I do with my paintings is I often incorporate graphs, especially line graphs. And so you'll see that line there across part of the painting, that line with the dots. And that is a graph about basically like the size of glaciers in Washington State. And I live in Washington, but I'm not from here. I didn't grow up in a place with glaciers. I grew up in the Northeast in like Massachusetts and then lived in Maine. My parents are from Michigan, and so none of us kind of had glacial landscapes in our environment, even though I now live near them. And so I try to tell stories about places that people know and care about, but I also hope that like stories like this about glaciers can still resonate with people who don't live in those places and learn about why they're important. And so I work full time as an artist and a science communicator. I run my own small business here in Washington. On the left, I'm holding a painting commission that I did for someone of the big mountains here that are covered in a lot of which are covered in glaciers. There's hundreds here, and that snow and ice is super important water resource for this region, especially in the warm, dry summer months. And then the photo on the right is me starting a piece. And so it's faint because I'm sketching it out in pencil and I'm sketching out all these different seabirds you can kind of see on my screen in the background. And so obviously a large part of my work is just making the art, but there's so many other things that go into that I'll share. And so by science communicator, I just kind of mean like what it sounds like is like sharing different science stories with people, but I do it through my paintings and through outreach versus like all the other types of arts like 3D art, music, writing, board games, like all these cool ways in which we can learn about science topics that, um, because we have obviously the traditional forms of learning about science are great as well, but the more kind of forms we have to connect with different people, with different interests and different learning strengths and all these things, the more methods, the better. And I think the art has something really different than the science has, and it can bring a new layer by having like these like kind of layers of like emotion and connection to it. And so I got started um, with this kind of work when I was in school. I went to the University of Maine and I did a double major in art and climate science. So on the left is me standing with some big paintings that I made during that time. And on the right is me getting to go down and work as a scientist in Antarctica and basically study how just a piece of the ice sheet has changed over time, over the past, and that change in the past can kind of inform us about what may happen in the present. And so a lot of like natural science degrees allow you to do field work and travel, whether that's like where you live or you're traveling somewhere far away, like the Antarctic. And so I've also done research in a lot of other places, including the most is here where I live in Washington State, which I'll share a little bit about. But yeah, that's a big chunk of my background, and it's kind of over that time at UMaine where I was like figuring out like, okay, I'm doing these two majors because I believe there's some way like I can combine them, but I'm trying to figure out how. And the kind of end result of that was starting to make data art. And so another important element of who I am is I am the art director of the North Cascade Glacier Climate Project. I co-lead that project with my dad, who's the science director, and so he's the person in the light blue shirt. And so glaciers are definitely a part of my kind of almost family like upbringing in a way where, again, I didn't live in a place with glaciers, but I started getting to go out and help with this research when I was 16, which is so fortunate and special. It was really hard and inspiring, and all of the things that like getting to have that kind of opportunity when you're young can do, and like kind of shaping your direction. And so in co-leading the project now, I help with all the science and the field work we do on the glaciers here in Washington. The North Cascades are the mountain range that I live near. But I also like bring in different people to help us share our work. So like artists and journalists and different types of science communicators. So one thing that's really important to me as an artist is like trying to use the tools and knowledge and network that I have um to like find opportunities to help like to work with other artists and to provide them opportunities too. So I'm gonna show some data from this project and kind of how I make it the art piece that I made based on that data. And so this is a graph that I'll like explain, and it says at the top North Cascade glacier mass balance from 1984 to 2023. So that's about exactly 40 years. And so the mass balance of glaciers is just like their health. And so basically, like, every year there's going to be new snow that falls in the winter, but there's also going to be melt that happens in the summer. And so if you kind of take the difference between that gain and that loss of ice for the glacier, that's kind of your balance or your budget at the end of the year. And so there's still going to be some years now and then where the glaciers gain more than they lose, but for the most part, um, with how rapidly our climate is warming, it's making it so the glaciers are melting really rapidly in the summer. They're also not getting enough. The precipitation that's falling in the winter is rain a lot more rather than snow. So they're retreating and thinning and getting smaller. And that's what this data set is showing. And it's a super emotional data set for me because I've seen this happen. And so sometimes when we see a graph, it's just like we're just seeing it as line, or we're seeing it as something scientific and not like really feeling what that means. And it can be hard to, and it's different when you're involved in the research like I am for this example. But that's why I try to make art about these lines. And so even putting this is that this orange line is that same graph, just simplified. And I put it in front of Mount Baker, which is one of the big glaciated mountains that I work on here in Washington, and our research team one year. And the glacier behind us is one of the ones that we study, and they're basically just monitoring its changes in size, its changes in snow. And this is the painting that I made using that graph and using that data. And so the graph line, like I pointed out when it was kind of cropped in that first intro slide, this is that painting, and the graph line is basically supposed to be the top surface of the glacier. And so all of the ice is underneath that graph, and it's showing people like, look how much the ice is changing and getting smaller overall for these glaciers in Washington, and kind of putting it in this beautiful landscape. And so that's how I tell stories. But like I said, I try to tell stories about lots of different environments because for some people like me, they love glaciers, even if or even if people have never seen one, they love them or think they're beautiful. But for some people, that's not going to be, their interest. And so this is a piece that is about kind of ecosystem changes. And so the orange kind of cutting across this image is basically about like temperature rise kind of going into the future. And the different lines are kind of showing like different potential amounts of warming from low to high. And so above that orange line, there's a bunch of different types of plant species that are kind of commonly found in Maine. And yeah, they're just commonly found there. They're really kind of beautiful and special species that are in that environment. And then below the orange is supposed to be kind of the future version where a lot of those species are still there, but there's also all these other plant species that maybe have come in from like that do well in the south, like tulip trees and different types of flowers that you might not see yet in Maine. And so it's just kind of showing how plant communities can shift, and that's not all good or all bad, or it's just complicated. And so kind of just highlighting that kind of ecosystem shift that is already happening. The the biggest opportunity in terms of like reach out into the world that I've had as an artist was to do a cover for Time magazine, and that was in July of 2020. So it's already been almost 5 years, even though it really doesn't feel like that long to me. And so this was the little animation of the cover that Time created, but basically some of my work is a little bit more like abstracted like this, and not just like yeah, not just a more realistic landscape type of thing. And so there's basically 5 different graphs in this, and they're all global data. I didn't want to just do something that was like based on the US. This is global climate data. It's a story of what's happening to our world. And so the dark blue graph at the bottom is showing sea level rise from 1880 to 2020. The light blue is showing like the loss of land ice. And by that, I mean like the 2 ice sheets, Greenland and Antarctica, and then all of the mountain glaciers in the US and Canada and Europe and Asia, and kind of all of the ice of the world slowly decreasing from the 60s to today, or 2020 when I made it. The green area of the trees is showing the increasing use of renewable energy for the world from the 1960s. And that is like the use of renewable energy has even though we want more, like has really exploded around the world. And that's like it's really awesome to see some of those changes. The yellow is showing the increase in average temperature from the 1880s to today. And then the gray is showing our increasing use of fossil fuels. And that graph has a slight decrease at the top for a little bit because um, this was created in July of 2020, and so was the onset of the pandemic, and the world shut down in such big ways that was, kind of unprecedented, and kind of with in this way in terms of use of fossil fuels. And so kind of shows you how if we were to act on a big scale, it really quickly makes a difference. So even though that graph has continued to go up, it's still one that like there's that little layer of kind of hope for me. And in a lot of my work, I do try to include messages about like hope and action too. And so in some pieces that's not the forefront, but I try to do that a lot because I think that um we need to like inspire people around like what are the good things we can do for our environment. Like sure, some of these things are going to change no matter what, but what about the things that we can do, because there's so much. And so with that said, I think that what is put out into the world in terms of environmental news is really important, and the phrasing. And I actually think, as honored as I am, like the title "One Last Chance" for this issue of Time for me is like I think titles like that are kind of harmful. Um, because it's not like it's been 5 years. Like that wasn't our one last chance. Like there's never one last chance to do something about the about helping the environment. So I think it's kind of I've kind of laid out like why I make data and art and why I try to tell these different stories. And it's basically so that I can try to open these new pathways so we can kind of understand these kind of complex data topics and how they're connected in our world and our lives. I want to make these topics more accessible and relatable through communicating them through my art and in the ways that I share that art. And so I'm gonna walk through basically how I create my data art and what my process looks like. And so a lot of times I'm starting with like that idea, like what am I inspired by? Is there a topic I've been learning about or a graph? Sometimes I'm making art for someone, like an individual or a science research group, and they're bringing me some ideas that I can kind of sort through. But for this example, I was coming up with the idea, and I was living near the coast in Maine, and so I really wanted to do a painting about coastal change for a show I was going to be having, an art show. And so there's three different graphs I'm going to show that I found for this piece. The first one is about sea level rise. I put that in a lot of my work just because it's such a obviously affects, everywhere in the world, and it has so many different stories you can pull apart with it. And so this is about sea level rise from the 90s to about present, just showing it the global rise slowly going up over time. The second graph is a survey. So again, it's just like, can only be so representative, but as it says at the top, it's the percentage of US adults who say protecting the environment is a top priority for the president and Congress. So it's showing that amount slowly going up from 2008 to about 2020, going up by over 20%, where the majority of people in this survey are saying that's a top priority. And this is from the Pew Research Center. And so just trying to show some kind of mindsets and perspectives and like hopeful things around, yeah, people wanting to protect the environment. And so the third and final graph is about National Wildlife Refuge land in Maine, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. So those are the three states that border um, the part of the ocean that's called the Gulf of Maine. Like all three of them have a piece of the Gulf of Maine along them. And so it's just showing from the 50s to from 1950 to 2020, basically like the increase in land being set aside for wildlife refuges. And I know different wildlife refuges have some different rules and stuff, but usually, like some are, you know, some people aren't really allowed versus but a lot of them are created for people to use as well, kind of in tandem with the, with it being set aside for the ecosystem. And so I think that's really neat to like remember it's land for us as well. And so once I've kind of chosen that topic, I'm thinking about the story that I want to tell. And so I'm already starting to dive into it, those graphs. But for this example, I decided I wanted to focus on how sea level rise affects coastal marshes. And um, and these are just photos from online because I was getting inspiration and getting ideas about like, okay, I want to show people like doing things to protect these landscapes and like taking action. And so these people are planting marsh grass kind of in areas where it's been disturbed and going back and replanting it. And so I'll collect images as part of the process. And so for a piece about coastal marshes, I was thinking about like what different species might I include? Like, what is the landscape going to look like? This is a photo from my phone of a marsh in Maine in the fall. And kind of once I have all that material, like I have my photos, ideas, I have some graphs in mind. That's when I'll start to do that like sketching part. And I'm thinking about like the story I want to tell. And this can sometimes I think of an idea pretty quickly in this process. Sometimes it takes a long time, but it's where I'm coming up with the new idea of what I'm going to show visually. And so I'll start with, a blank piece of sketch paper and kind of sketch out these little thumbnails as I call them, like, blank boxes and just sketch in ideas. And these sketches in the middle are my real ones from the process. I'm a messy, quick sketcher. And it's just ways for me to get ideas down and think about like what am I going to incorporate? Like people, wildlife, where's the graph going to go? Like how, yeah, what's my composition going to look like? I'm just kind of thinking about how what the piece is going to look like. And I'll talk about it later, but I do data art stuff with students and I'll kind of tell them that this part of the process to think about it like their first draft in a writing assignment or another type of project where their first draft is kind of rough. It's hard to like think of, hard to think of some of the ideas of what you want to say. And then you kind of, your brain warms up, you start to like go back and edit and refine it and think of stronger ideas. And I think that coming up with visual ideas can be really similar. It's not going to work. We all have such different ways of thinking, different brains, which is awesome. So I know that's probably not the case for everyone like it is for me, but as a visual learner um, and thinker, like this process really helps me think of stronger ideas. I'll often make like 20 of them and like think of something stronger than I would have right away. And so I think that with data art, it's not about like obviously I'm a professional artist, but for others who do it, it's not about like how good or not they are as an artist. It's about like the story that they're telling. And so now that I've like sketched out things, I'll like choose one of these ideas and get started. And I start by sketching everything out in pencil. And I don't erase it. I'll paint right on top of it with my watercolors. This is zooming in on just part of the piece, showing the birds and the fish that I'm sketching. And then once I'm done sketching, I'll start to paint. And so I'm going to zoom out and I'll explain like what's happening in the scene. So these are two different pieces of paper. Um, Obviously, but the image the image for this painting goes like kind of seamlessly from one to the next. So if you can kind of tell like that green area with the fish is like, yeah, the whole image is connected as one. I partly did this because I kind of like the look when it's like framed and hung as a pair, but also because these are each like 2 by 3 feet. They're kind of big. They're pretty big. And so it's easier for me to like work on two rather than one huge piece of paper. And then the green around the edge is like the tape I'm using to keep the edges of the painter clean from paint that I take off at the very end. And so when I'm painting, I start with kind of background areas first, and or at least usually, and kind of start with like simpler areas. And so, especially because I've sketched everything out, I'm painting around the fish in that blue and green those blue and green colors, and the pale yellow is going to be like the first layer of where I paint like the marsh grass. And so, a lot of times with painting, you can kind of, there's obviously so many different tricks to different types of art media, but with like painting, a lot of times you'll do what's called like a wash. And so like that pale yellow, I'm just coating the whole area that's going to be the marsh grass that color because I'm doing this in the fall. The grass is going to be all yellow. And so that way when I go in and add details like blades of grass, there's not just the white of the paper shining through. It's like that first background color. And I don't have to worry about it looking perfectly. A lot of it's going to get covered. And some variation is actually nice, but I'll do that kind of thing a lot. Or like other types of painting, you do like whole underpaintings where you paint your whole like canvas first, like orange, for example. Anyway, um, so this is zooming in and showing that a little bit more detailed, how I've painted around the fish, because I'll go and paint them later. I do the details. I'll show you just a couple more process photos. You can see I've started to fill in some of the grass areas, kind of utilizing that background yellow color that I had painted first. And then I've painted the water in the marsh, which is the brighter blue versus like the more like actual ocean water is like the greener color. And then um, jumping way forward, tons of blades of grass, and done a lot of the details for the fish. Still have to paint a lot of the birds and the people and finish up the trees. And then these are the completed pieces. And so it's supposed to be again like kind of the coastal marsh, like in the northeast of the US and showing sea level rise. That graph is at the bottom and is the top surface of the water with all the fish. And then I'll kind of zoom in to better highlight like the other stories and elements in it. But really trying to like my overall message was to like show again like these coastal marsh landscapes are changing, are going to be altered by sea level rise. They're going to be affected, and that just is the reality. But with that in mind, like there's a lot of things we can do for this landscape, for other landscapes to kind of help lessen the changes, to help like prepare for them, to help preserve them as best we can. And those are the messages I really wanted to tell in this piece. Like these landscapes, we don't give up on these landscapes or other landscapes. There's so much cool restoration work we can do. And so these are some of the people, like in the left is supposed to be like a father, daughter walking, enjoying this beautiful land. The top middle is supposed to be a woman measuring the depth of water in the marsh, kind of like monitoring the tides. The the two people in the bottom middle are planting marsh grass, and the people in the right are observing the landscape, like noticing things and changes, and they're looking at kind of the data. And the I guess I'll go back to the other piece to show like the other two graph lines, they might be hard to see. Um, but those two people in that right hand painting at the top, they're pointing at the graph and looking up at the graph in pale green. That is about basically like that survey of kind of people and say that environmental protection is a top priority. And then underneath their feet in pale yellow is the graph about wildlife refuge. And so sometimes when I have like multiple data sets in art, I will kind of weave it in because it can just be a lot of information. And so if some people like don't see it, that's okay. If they read the caption, they're going to learn it all. But if they don't and they just take away some of the stories, that's okay because some of it is a lot of information. So if I kind of like weave some of it in, it's kind of less overwhelming. It's kind of like more a different journey for each person and how much time they spend looking at the art and learning about it. But for these pieces, I really had fun like researching different species that um, live in these marshes that kind of come in seasonally, sometimes like different fish and different types of birds. And there's a lot of like um, unique wildlife that lives in these places and relies on them for their habitat. So again, these are the three graphs that I used. And so on their own, they're important data. I know from my like experience doing science research that like kind of even collecting one data point is a big thing. Like data is hard to like to get this data is difficult to produce it in this like way like where people can learn about it is difficult. And so my what I do with my art isn't supposed to be like better than this data. It's not supposed to replace it or anything like that. It's supposed to like just share it with more people. Like this is great, but we want more people to see and learn about these topics. And so my art is one way to do that. And so for the last part of the talk, then I'm going to share how I share my art and different ways that I do that. And so one of the ways, like, of course, there's online stuff, but I'm not going to talk about that as much because I don't think it's as interesting. Um, but I really like to share my work kind of in different kind of physical forms. And so I've done, like I mentioned, the time cover, but I've done a lot of fun covers for books or magazines or features like inside them. And so stuff like that is really neat because it allows like really different audiences to see my work, like just people who subscribe to or buy that thing, see it. Did one pair of skis for a little ski company in Maine, which was fun. But basically, it's just like it allows my work to be out there in the world and for more people to learn about it and see it than would just kind of like at a gallery where only certain people go in or, online where only certain people like follow you or, see what you do. And so it's just fun to have different ways to put my work out in the world. And that's a big part of what I make it is like that educational aspect. And so I do really love doing gallery and different types of shows. Well, it could be fancy gallery, it could be a coffee shop. I really like doing kind of the whole spread. I really loved that as part of this talk, the library got prints of mine to hang on display. And so if you didn't know that, you could go check out those prints. They ordered a bunch of prints of my art. And I think it's just so much more powerful to see art in person. Um, and so I've had, like I said, a whole range of different shows and experiences. Like I showed you guys just talked about these pieces, and I was making them for my first and only inclusion in a museum, which was an art museum in Salem, Massachusetts, which is near Boston. And the whole show is called Climate Action, Inspiring Change, which is really awesome to have like that hopeful kind of action oriented show with the art. And there was like 20 other artists, so it was really neat grouping. And then I actually just opened my first like I've been in maybe like 10 or 15 different shows of kind of like every sort of spectrum. So not like a ton, but like a good chunk. But I just curated my first art exhibition, which just means like I let it, I designed the show, I chose the other artists and was kind of in charge of like all of the stuff beforehand, like getting labels and doing the marketing and finding a gallery space and finding funding and just kind of lots of communication with the other artists and divvying up tasks. And so it was like so fun and hard to do it. It was something that was new, but the whole show is about glaciers and it's in Seattle, Washington, which is why I wanted to do glaciers. So now this inspired me to do other shows, maybe about other types of landscapes and places that where those landscapes are more important. Like if I did one in the Midwest, it'd be cool to think about what kind of stories I would want to tell because I think wherever we live, there's like really important environmental stories, obviously, um, that are can be really powerfully told with art. And so that shows up right now. I'm just open on Friday. Um, and one of the big things that I do that is kind of like similar with this talk is like a lot of different types of outreach with different audiences. And so I work with a lot of students like K through 12, both in person and like virtually like this through Zoom, where um I'm meeting with students and I'm kind of showing them what I do, and then often they're making their own data art. And so it can be stuff that they're really interested in exploring and learning about, stuff that they're maybe learning about in school, maybe topics that are like local to them that they're digging into. And so I've worked with schools um, all over the country, a little bit out of the country, but mainly just in um, since I can do stuff like virtually with Zoom now. I've been doing way more of these. And so this is some data art that different like middle and high school students made. Um, but I've worked with I don't know, maybe 150 or more schools, but over a long period of time. And so I am always really inspired by the stories the students tell and what I can see from their art in this project. And it really tells me that they really understand the data and that it's telling a story when they dive into it like this way. Um, and so here's a few more examples. I liked how the student used color to kind of tell a story. A lot of times I get sent stuff and I don't necessarily always know the data because the teachers are really doing the hard work with this project, but I can like get the gist of the story really clearly. And so I seen this one's about sea level rise or ocean acidification or something like that, showing color change. This one's something to do with shellfish, but again, like they really used kind of color and the amount of shellfish it looks like to kind of tell that story. Some really cute and fun ones, which I just love sometimes too. Like they just really went for this otter being like the star of the show and being really like having such a fun expression. And it looks like they did some like collage texture stuff. And then the last one, I really liked like their kind of patterns with the raindrops. And so, yeah, it's just really fun to work with schools and students of different ages and see what they create. And I do this type of stuff with different like adult communities too, where they make data art, and that can be really different. A lot of times it's like a shorter thing, whereas schools maybe have like, a few weeks, a few different class sessions to work on this project. A lot of times when I do like a workshop, like this is what I did in Washington this winter, um, people are just kind of coming in for like an hour or two. And so it's not about making some like good finished artwork. It's about them like just diving into the data with other people in the community for a little bit. So because this was like a coastal community, had stuff about some different restoration, like some different species that were kind of coming back from a restoration group. Um, And I feel like a lot of the topics I've shared with you guys tonight happen to be coastal, but there's so many other stories of mine that aren't. And I also sometimes when I do this and share it with a different community, I'm thinking about what stories may or may not be like important to them. Not to say coastal still is important, but just mean like it makes me think about like what stories am I missing? Because there's endless science stories you can tell, but just what are some big things that I would like to tell? And I think, yeah, it kind of gets me thinking about that. And so, um, my kind of main like takeaways are that I think that art and science are really complementary. They both kind of like use creativity and complexity in different ways. And so they can really be paired so well together and kind of um a lot of times they are about like connecting with technical ideas and finding ways to communicate them. And so, second, I think that creating art with data can kind of capture like a certain place and time. And like, it's interesting that my data art is like, say, pieces when I first started making this in 2015, it's like, well, it's been 10 years, like, this data story has evolved, but that doesn't mean the piece doesn't still have like value and relevance because it's still showing an important story. But maybe I like, I've done once where I like recreated the same graph like piece, but with an updated graph and like kind of an updated style. And lastly, I think that art like really creates space for conversation and action around these topics. And so um, I think there's a lot of different, again, like I'm showing you guys painting and I'm showing you my data art, but there's obviously so many different types of amazing art out there. And I think it can really break down barriers for people, connect with them on this deeper emotional level, and feel more accessible and relatable. Um, and yeah, I think that emotional thing is kind of one of the key differences for me with the from the science that I think for a lot of people, science isn't gonna give that like emotional, like that feeling of like, oh, this is why these topics matter. This is why this environmental change around me matters. And sometimes it's hard with all of the information, all of the changes to feel everything, and that's okay. But that's what art can like help open up and um and do. So thank you. Thank you very much for everyone for attending and listening to me share about my art and why I do it. And again, I'd love to hear from any of you with questions about my work or to share something about like yourselves or um, changes you're seeing in the area you live now or have lived in the past or anything like that.
I think your work is incredible. And I was interested as you were talking about, at some point you were talking about, and you opened it up to other areas, like I think you mentioned civil rights, and my head is already going, oh, with the data showing in social topics. But at any rate, have you ever thought about, or maybe you already do, having mental workshops, but like more like a camp or an extended, like 3 or 4 days, where people could really get into the topics a little more deeply,
Like doing like a longer workshop with a community, that kind of thing, and like
or even something that people could travel to. I mean, I would go to an event like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I haven't, and I think that's a really cool idea because I think one thing that's interesting in like running my own business is sometimes it's like creating this glacier art show I was just showing that I showed you guys like that one photo of. It was kind of like I've been wanting for that to happen. It can be really confusing and hard to figure out how to get into like this like into galleries and how to like make that so that you're known in that space. And so because it can be hard, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna create this opportunity for me and my artists and me and other artists and find a way to make that happen and just make the show. I'm gonna make like if I want that to happen, I'm just gonna have to find a way to make it happen myself and not like it's not gonna necessarily come to me. And I think for your idea, I feel like I sometimes see other artists or creatives like, yeah, creating and hosting um events, workshops, like different type of stuff that is more of like a little retreat or a more multi-day thing, and it seems really impactful. So I haven't really thought of doing it myself, but I really like the idea, and if I did something like that, I would I would share about it on definitely on my like my website. I have like an email list you can sign up for. Um And that would be one place I would definitely share is like that email list. And my website is my name. It's jillpelto.com. I would also share about on my Instagram would be the other place, but definitely the email list on my website as well. So I think that's a really cool idea and one that would take me some time to think about, but that I would definitely honestly really consider doing. So thank you.
Thank you for your question. And if anybody wants to throw a question in the chat, anybody who's joining us from home, feel free to throw your questions into the chat and I can make sure to read them aloud if you don't feel comfortable speaking up.
May I, oh,
Go ahead,
may
go
I
ahead.
ask a question?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm on my phone and I don't know how to find the chat. So,
No worries.
Jill, the prints that Anessa printed are just beautiful. And
Thank
you mentioned that your pieces, when you had two pieces with the fish and that they were 2 feet by 3 feet, that scale is really magnificent. Is that the size you typically use for paintings? Or is that just kind of depend on the piece or the data?
Yeah, it depends. I would say it's a size that like in my dream world I could always use for paintings, but they just take so long to make because my work is really detailed and slow, like the planning and then creating. Um, and so those because they're going to be museum, I always like I really like bigger work, and obviously it's way bigger work than that, but like I really like bigger work. But some of my pieces are more like 9 by 12 or 16 by 20, which is still decent, but like kind of ranging more in that realm. But when I have kind of like the time or the motivation to do bigger, that's what I'd prefer to do. And so like in the future, I'd prefer to do more of that because I just think it's really cool and like better in person and powerful, and you can include more. And so I've been doing a little bit more big work. I have some big commissions I'm working on. Um, like I do commissions for like say it's environmental nonprofit or a science research group or an individual, but it's always like just environmental art stuff only. Um, but I made two new big paintings that are similar size, like about 2 by 3 feet, a little under, for the exhibit that just opened in Seattle. And so both of those, it was a nice fit because they're like showing the whole mountain landscape from the mountains and the glaciers down to the rivers and all the way to the ocean. So it was showing this whole like big landscape. I didn't show them because I don't have good photos of them yet. But yeah, so I think big work is really powerful is all, but I don't always make it because of time and budget.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mariana, I think you have a question.
Yes. Thank you very much for sharing all this. I was so excited to like see your work. I think it's amazing. And I am a graduate student at Iowa State University. I have a bachelor's in molecular biology, and right now I'm studying creative writing and environment. So I have like that similar of like bringing together art and science. And I just wanted to ask you, like, how did you like partner or connect to all of these, like the environmental groups or museums or schools? Because I would like to know like how to like engage in the sort of activities that you do because I just don't know like how do you find those places where that work is needed and to like create that art or those opportunities to like work with people or with students in like that realm.
Good question. I think I feel like a lot of times when I was in college, I would be like told like, oh, it's kind of about your network, which is always like, yeah, but like, how does one go about that? It was like kind of it felt like at that time like very nebulous kind of thing. But I think it's been interesting to like slowly learn, still am learning like how to kind of build out a network and because that's how I get opportunities. And so I find that it's been kind of like a give and take where if I am seeking things out, I'm like contacting places and like trying to get work. And so I get some of it and I don't get some of it in the whole spectrum. But then there's going to be time periods once I've been putting like my name out there and what I do for a while, then stuff like sometimes comes back to me too. And people reach out to me too. And so to get started, I feel like um, just making something that is like something you can share with people, like whether it's just like a document, like a PDF of like, here's what I do and some examples of my work, or whether you can make it like and maybe you've done some of this, so of course I don't know, but like if like I made a website and I had decided because I wanted to sell prints to make an Etsy shop. So those were two early things that I did, was just like having that website with just like some of my art and some info about me, some of the things that like I wanted to be doing. And then I could like share that with people. And so if there's like a kind of space that you want to be working with, like say a school, um, I have just like I'll just sometimes often actually email is the most common thing I've done, just like email a place like a school and be like, this is kind of what I can do. And like, kind of a mix of like with schools, I always have a really flexible budget. Like I do some volunteer, some paid, that kind of thing. So it can always be like basically just providing them with a little bit of info, and kind of same for other sorts of groups. Like um I think don't try to take it all on, just like maybe even just making a list of like, here's some environmental groups I might be interested in, here's some schools, and just try to like contact them, but like have something ready that you can like show them of like what you would, want to do with them. And I was kind of always like, I've been kind of told like people don't really know what you do, so the more people kind of you tell about what you do, the better. And then that ball can kind of, kind of slowly get rolling over time. And like I said, then stuff could come back to you. Um, but
How's
yeah,
it
I think I
going?
think yeah. Does that make sense? Is that
Yeah, thank
helpful at
you so
all?
much. And
Okay.
congratulations on your work.
Thank you.
Yes, and that's how you came to be at the Ames Public Library, right? I found out
Exactly.
about your work from a coworker and went to your website, and Bob's your uncle. So,
Yes, exactly.
we have a question from the audience at home. A technical question about about your paintings. Gary would like to know if you ever label the X and Y axes of your graphs, or if it makes the work too cluttered.
Yeah, I usually don't, and I feel like it's just one of those artistic decisions that it's not like right or wrong. It's just like I've kind of decided not to mostly. I sometimes actually have done it a few times. And then when I work with students, a lot of times they'll choose to, because it can make it more clear sometimes. Like I'll have, whenever I share my work online or in person, like I have a description. Obviously, not everyone's going to read that description, but um, I think it's just kind of like a artistic decision of um, maybe someone else wouldn't think it felt too cluttered, but I think sometimes I do, and I'm trying to like step away from some of the elements of the traditional graph, and so just having the line in there, or whatever type of graph it is, mainly line graphs, but not always. Um, and so I think it's kind of fun to just have it in there, make people kind of wonder what the line is and think about it a little bit more, and notice it. So, yep. So not usually.
You said you mainly work in watercolors, which is what we have on exhibit here at the library. But when I reached out to you, you said that you were working on a mural. So what other kinds of art forms have you worked with?
Yeah, I've mainly always done 2D. And so mainly like different types of painting. I've done acrylic oil, watercolor, and then different types of printmaking, which are so many like woodcut and screen printing, I feel like are two big ones that people know, but there's a lot of different types, like stuff with metal that you etch into. And so a lot of yeah, I really like playing with different media, but have been really focused on watercolor for a while. But I think I'm kind of ready to maybe pivot, not to stop watercolor, but to also bring in back some more acrylic and other things. Um, and so the pieces I just finished, it was kind of like your mural. It was more of like these big wood panels that I was painting and then hanging on site. And they were like 4 by 4 feet, right, versus, so I guess not nearly as big as a whole mural, but still really big for me to do 4 by 4 feet. And it was like a week to do it, which was really hard. And so that was a fun challenge. And then for the art show, it was fun because that I just put on in Seattle. It was really fun because I was so inspired by like some of the other media, and it makes me want to explore more. Like there was a fiber artist, um, a like wood block artist, someone who does sculptural, like kind of sculpted like icebergs and stuff. And there's even like a cake artist who like makes kind of it's so hard to explain if you haven't seen it, but like say it'd be like a layered cake and each layer is like snow on a glacier anyway. It's really fun. She does like cool sculptural stuff. And yeah, so that inspires me a lot. I had a video that I'm playing in the gallery, which I hadn't set that up before, like kind of doing a looping video kind of thing of the research I do in the North Cascades with my dad. And I think something I want to do more of as like my last point is kind of like if you've been to like a gallery or an event and there's kind of something that's a little bit more like interactive. So say I have like a painting, but there's like these more like kind of 3D elements or things that kind of like really bring you into the space and make you feel really absorbed in that space. I think music can help with that a lot too, like bringing up emotion. So something that's a little bit more multimedia, where again, maybe there's still the painting, but there's these other like more 3D elements that are helping create that. So know that like I have a picture in my head, I'm probably not describing it very well, but basically as an artist, it's fun to keep playing and like pushing and challenging yourself because then you think of new ideas and um, connect with different people. So
Yeah. All right, do we have any more questions?
Any plans for any books?
no, I definitely would like to, but no plans. I think two things I would like to do. One would just be, of course, like something highlighting my art, or it could even be something from like the glacier art from this exhibit from all the artists, like a collection. But the other book that I've kind of pursued some stuff with before, but I'm not right now, is potentially doing a book with all like the student data art. Because I think that the student data art is really powerful and it would be kind of cool. It's just like almost like a picture book form, like all their different art from different ages, from different parts of places in the country, and different types of regions. Because it's kind of like it's powerful on its own, but for me, sometimes working with students and like say they're in like fifth grade and they're making data art and they get it, and it's kind of like, look, like these students get it, they're concerned about what's happening, they want people to take action, like they get it in fifth grade, like because they're being taught it, which is what's the amazing part. Like obviously people were not taught about environmental science and often all places to learn. But I would love to make a student data art book. Um, but I definitely don't know that world. So some learning to do before that happens.
What are some of your favorite places that you've gone for field work?
Oh, there's always like cool special things about each place, of course. So I can just describe like a couple. My big love is always working in Washington State just because it's such a long-term and deeply personally connected place, and it's always like in the summer, so there's always like wildflowers and mountain goats and the glaciers, and that's yeah, that will always be like my big love, this landscape. Um, Working in the Antarctic, is like feels really unique and challenging. I haven't worked in the Arctic, and I think there'd be like a lot of overlap with those feelings of like it just feels so isolated and different than any other landscape I've been to. And just yeah, that isolation was like a big one, but it is so like strikingly beautiful, and the palette is so limited with like whites and blues and the colors of the rock. Um, and so I I just thought it was really special to get to like it was really special to see that landscape. I know it's not one that a lot of people get to see and just kind of like learn about the deep history that is really preserved by the landscape and the ice there, because there's a lot less change there in terms of like um at the pace of other places because it's so cold and dry. There's not like a lot of precipitation kind of changing the landscape. So it's all like a slow process of change, unless like it's right on the coast. Um, and then and then just like the logistics of field work and getting down there was interesting. And then most recently I was like did like an artist in residence program, which just means like you're going to make art, you're living somewhere for a little bit, and it was like at sea on a research boat um off the coast of Chile, and that was this past September. And so it was like a month yeah, a month on this research boat with a team, science that like I kind of knew tangentially about from my master's, but was a lot of it was like very new to me, and like the how of how they did their field work was mostly new to me. And so it was basically like they're out on a boat, they're collecting samples from the seafloor. They're also like mapping the seafloor, like the topography and like the layers of sediment and stuff like that. They're learning about basically like the history of that region and like what's there now in terms of like biology and stuff. And so my role on board was to make art about the research and try to communicate it. And so I made a series of paintings while on board. But it was just fascinating to get to, it's like a kind of a peek into someone else's life and work to get to do that kind of stuff, just to kind of jump in to these people like that who are doing this for their career and who like have so much expertise around a certain topic, and you can just kind of dive into it with them and try to help them to communicate that. So that's the last example. Okay.
Okay, we have a question from Taylor. They say, with my art, I've struggled to accurately capture the trends. How do you go about ensuring that you have an accurate representation and proportions for the data?
Good question. Yeah, I have some different methods that I use, and of course with data, like it's important it's important to me as some yeah, it's important to me to like make sure it's data that is accurate, to like be telling the story in the right way and not to like say there's a graph showing warming, but like one year is showing cooling. It's like you can't just cherry pick that one cooling year and then extrapolate, so it's like you have to be careful with data and how you tell that story. Um, and so that's one thing that I keep in mind is like making sure. And if it's something like big picture, like sea level rise or something, it's easy to find. I'm not worrying about whose data it is. Um, but if it's something like primarily one researcher and this is what they do for work, then I like will reach out to them and kind of um tell them what I'm thinking, especially because I do try to really put my art out there. Like I'll tell them what how I would like to use their research or their data and kind of get their feedback and permission. And so kind of with the other part of that question, when I do have the data, like when I'm going to be ready to use it, I will sometimes play with the like proportions like a little bit, like say I need the graph to fit on like my 16-inch page. I want it to go all the way across, then I can like I'll make it that size on my screen and kind of play with yeah, play with how it looks because you can kind of condense things a little bit as long as it's still showing the trends accurately. I think you can play with the axes like a little bit. And so I'll do that, and then I so that it's accurate, will like just directly trace it on like using tracing paper. And so if for Taylor asked the question, if you're familiar with like transfer paper or like black carbon paper or whatever, um you just like put it on your paper, and when you rub on it, like that's gonna get like whatever you draw is gonna get transferred. So if you're interested in that and you look that up, but basically I'm tracing on the data, and I'm like then able with tracing paper to be like just make sure it's in the right place before I transfer it. That makes sense.
Okay, another question from our guests from home. Diane would like to know, when you sell your work, do you include a story of what you're representing?
Good question. I usually don't in terms of like so it's something I've thought about doing and I have done sometimes, but I usually don't just because um of the logistics. Like I have like an Etsy shop, for example, and so it's where I sell like a bunch of prints of my work. Um, and and so it's just like a lot of little pieces of kind of paper to have around of like the kind of like say there's like 50 different things on my shop and a little paper description for each. But I have thought about doing that because I do think it's cool to have people know, but I also wonder if they would like keep that little piece of paper. So it's kind of my hope is that um when I send them the work that like I always have the description on my website. And it's not like everyone's gonna go on, but like I always have the description on my website and stuff. So it's something I should give some more thought into because sometimes when I've done something like an art market and I'm selling stuff in person, I've had a description. But a lot of times I just haven't prioritized doing that because it's another little thing to have a bunch of, and how many do you need of it, and that kind of thing. But I'd love to hear if you think that would be valuable to include, because sometimes as an artist, you're like, should I do this? Should I not? And sometimes just getting feedback on that is valuable. So.
I was surprised to see the shorts with the glaciers.
Oh yeah. Yeah, a lot of people are, and it's just because it's in the summer and you kind of don't think of those landscapes as ever being warm, but they are like um and maybe not in like, Antarctica necessarily in shorts, but like in a place like Washington or the glaciers in Canada or places like that. Like we can be out on a summer day on the glacier and it can be, 70, 80, maybe it's 90 down in town. It's not, it's, obviously cooler up in the mountains, but it's still warm. And so it can get really hot up on the glaciers um but there's so much snow, so much ice that there's still going to be, um snow at the end of the year. So it's melting, but it's there. Like I mean, like even if it was healthy and now what's happening now, it would be melting, but there. So it's kind of funny though to be out there, but I'm so used to it now.
All right, I think we're about out of time this evening. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you so much, Jill. We really, really appreciate you speaking with us this evening.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming and your great questions. It was really fun to visit with this group. Like I said, I really like connecting with different communities and hearing from them. Some of my favorite things. So I appreciate you bringing me in. Thank you
Jill's art is going to remain on display here in the library until the end of April. And what we have done here at the library for our exhibit is we printed out QR codes and pasted them on the corner of the frame, which links to the description on Jill's website. So if you want more information about the piece, you can just take a quick picture of that QR code and there will be more information right there. So I would definitely encourage you all to come and look at the exhibit and to visit Jill's website because there's even more amazing pieces there. So thank you all for joining us and I hope you all have a good evening.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.